You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
A firefighter wakes up alone in an abandoned hospital. No memory, no people, and no way to explain the blood on his clothes. As he navigates the ruins of his city, searching for answers and his missing family, he uncovers a horrifying trail of silence, shadows, and something else. Something that watches, follows, waits. What he finds will change everything, not just for him, but for anyone still alive. If you love immersive horror stories that feel terrifyingly real, tales of survival, hidden truths, and haunting discoveries, subscribe to Soul Studios now, because the most chilling stories are the ones you don't remember living. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and remember, some nightmares begin after you wake up. Thunder cracks overhead as Mark Davis jolted awake on the cold hospital floor. His temples throbbed with pain, and for a moment he couldn't remember anything. Not the gash on his forehead, not why he was sprawled in darkness. He squinted through the gloom of the hospital room, illuminated only by brief flashes of blue-white lightning through a high window. The air was stale and silent. No hum of machinery, no chatter of nurses, only the ragged draw of his own breath. Shallow, ragged breaths. Mark's heart pounded as he struggled to his feet, bracing against the bed frame. His palm slipped in something wet with a squelch, and he realized he had been lying in a sticky puddle. In the next lightning flash, he saw dark crimson smeared across the tiles. Blood still tacky. A toppled IV stand lay beside an overturned gurney. The bed above him was empty, restraints dangling from its sides, as if whoever had been strapped there had broken free. He stumbled backward, pulse roaring in his ears. A sudden clang from the hallway made him freeze. Through the small reinforced glass window in the door, he glimpsed movement, a silhouette lurching past. "Hello?" Mark croaked, instantly regretting it. The shape halted. In the next lightning flash, he saw a figure in a hospital gown standing unnaturally still, head twitching at the sound of his voice. Distant siren wails outside, and as if triggered by it, the figure in the hall let out a guttural snarl. It hurled itself at the door, slamming into it with a sickening thud. Mark staggered back as the wired glass spiderwebbed with cracks under the impact. A pallid face stabbed against the pane, eyes milky, lips peeled back from blood-stained teeth. The creature, no, the person, was no longer human. It clawed and bashed at the door, making the metal rattle in its frame. Mark's survival instincts kicked in. He snatched up the IV stand, hands shaking on the cold steel. The door was thankfully locked or jammed, buying him seconds. "Oh God," he whispered, voice trembling. The thing on the other side shrieked, a sound so alien and piercing that it rattled his skull. With a final crash, the creature hammered its skull into the window, cracking it further, but not breaking through. Suddenly down the corridor, another noise echoed, a distant scuffling of footsteps followed by a muffled cry. The creature paused, head whipping toward the new sound like a predatory animal. It growled and then shuffled away from Mark's door, lured by the disturbance, leaving behind a smear of blood and saliva on the fractured glass. For a long moment, Mark stood in the darkness, chest heaving, the IV pole clutched in white-knuckled hands. Only then did the reality of this nightmare begin to sink in. Still trembling from the encounter, Mark forced himself to take stock. The dull ache in his skull suggested a concussion, and when he gingerly touched the side of his head, his fingers came away sticky with half-dried blood. A bandage had been wrapped around his forehead, now loosened. Someone had treated him before whatever this was happened. He glanced down at himself. Hospital scrub pants, no shirt, just stiff bandages wrapping his shoulder and ribs. In the intermittent light, he spotted a plastic patient ID bracelet on his wrist and raised it to read the name, Mark Davis. Yes, Mark, that was him. He racked his brain for memories, but everything was hazy. How had he gotten here? The last thing he could recall was flames, screams, then a sharp, searing pain in his arm and a rush of confusion. It was like a half-remembered nightmare. Mark shook off the thought for now. There was no time. He needed to find help, to find out what was going on, and find his family. The thought hit him like a bolt. He had a family, a wife, Anna, and their little boy, Jacob. Why weren't they here? Were they safe? Gritting his teeth, Mark tightened his grip on the IV stand and crept toward the hospital room door. The corridor beyond was dark except for the occasional flicker of lightning through shattered windows. A chemical tang of smoke hung in the air, mixed with the coppery stench of blood. Mark nudged the door open slowly. He stepped out, bare feet moving silently on the cold tile. The hallway was a scene from hell. Papers and medical supplies were strewn everywhere. A gurney lay on its side, wheels still slowly spinning as if recently disturbed. Bloody handprints trailed along the wall toward a stairwell door left ajar. Mark's breath hitched at a shape slumped under a flickering fluorescent light. A nurse, or what was left of one. She was face down in a pool of dark blood. He forced himself to inch closer. The back of her blue scrubs was torn and soaked. Biting down a surge of nausea, Mark pressed 2 fingers to her neck, checking for a pulse with trembling hope. Nothing. Her skin was already cool. Suddenly, a crash echoed from upstairs, followed by a distant howl that did not sound human. Mark jerked his hand back and gripped the IV stand defensively. The horrors weren't contained to one floor. He had to move. Now. He remembered there was a nurse's station around the corner. Keeping low, Mark crept past an abandoned wheelchair and an upended medicine cart, spilling pill bottles across the floor. At the nurse's station desk, a small battery-powered lantern flickered weakly, casting long shadows. He snatched it up and shook it. The light sputtered but held. Setting down the IV stand, he rifled through drawers, praying for anything useful. His fingers closed around something solid, a heavy-duty flashlight. He clicked it on, and a blessed cone of bright light pierced the darkness. As he swung the beam around, it illuminated a bulletin board on the wall covered with hastily pinned notices. One sign read, "Quarantine in effect. Do not leave the hospital." Another scrawled in red marker, "Infected inside. We are trapped." Mark's mouth went dry. Infected. Quarantine. He swept the light over more papers. A memo from the CDC, instructions on infection control, a list of symptoms. The dates were 13 days ago. 13 days. He'd lost nearly 2 weeks. Mark's stomach churned as he realized he'd been unconscious or delirious through it all. While the world fell apart, he was lying here, helpless. A fresh wave of fear and urgency coursed through him. Anna and Jacob were out there somewhere in this nightmare. He had to get to them. Mark spotted a duffel bag shoved under the desk with a tag that read Davis M, Personal Effects. Heart-pounding, he dragged it out. Inside were his belongings. A pair of heavy black boots and a dark jacket with reflective yellow stripes, his firefighter turnout gear. He hastily pulled on the boots, then the jacket over his bare torso. Its weight and familiar smell of smoke gave him a small sense of protection. On the jacket's sleeve, he could just make out the embroidered patch, City Fire and Rescue, Engine 4. Digging deeper, he found his wallet and phone. The phone was dead, no signal anyway. But in the wallet, behind his ID, a tiny photo of Anna and little Jacob smiled back at him. Mark felt a lump in his throat. He slipped the photo into his jacket's inner pocket, close to his heart. "I'm coming," he whispered. A distant growl from the stairwell jolted him back to the present. Time to go. He clipped the flashlight to his jacket, gripped the IV pole once more as a makeshift weapon, and steeled himself. If infected people were roaming the halls, he would need to stay quiet and move quickly. The main lobby and exit were down on the first floor. He was determined to reach them. One tense step at a time, Mark made his way toward the stairs, ears straining for any sign of that thing. The lantern's dying glow and his flashlight guided him through the darkness. Each open door he passed was a new risk. Any could conceal another of those creatures. At one room, a figure in a lab coat lay half in and half out of a doorway, unmoving. Blood spatter glistened on the wall behind. Mark swallowed hard and pressed on. He turned the last corner into the hospital's main lobby. The reception desk was deserted and chairs were strewn across the room. One wall of glass doors had been shattered outward. Wind and misty rain blew in, carrying the scent of smoke and decay. This was it, the way out. Rain pelted Mark's face as he emerged into the open. The hospital's entryway opened onto a wide parking lot. Several ambulances sat crookedly in the drive, doors gaping. One had its windshield smashed, wipers still frozen mid-swipe. Another was burned out, a blackened husk glistening with rain. Lightning flickered, revealing dozens of abandoned cars beyond the lot. Some crashed into each other, others mounted on curbs as if their drivers lost control. Mark kept his footsteps light as he passed a paramedic's bag spilled across the pavement. The only sounds were the patter of rain and a distant car alarm bleating somewhere blocks away. No people, no authorities sealing off the area, just emptiness and the ruins of panic. He tried the first ambulance, peering into the cab. The keys dangled in the ignition. Heart leaping, Mark jumped in and turned them. The engine gave a dull whine, but did not start. The battery was nearly dead. He cursed under his breath and slid back out, mindful not to close the door loudly. Perhaps it was for the best. Driving could attract unwanted attention, and the roads looked choked with wrecks anyway. Clutching his flashlight, Mark jogged across the lot toward the street. The city around the hospital was cloaked in darkness. Occasional fires guttered in the distance, casting a faint orange glow against low-hanging storm clouds. He passed a toppled traffic light pole and navigated around a city bus that had careened into a storefront. Inside the bus's open door, the shapes of several passengers still buckled in their seats didn't move. Mark averted his eyes. As he crept down a side street, he saw a figure up ahead shambling between parked cars. Mark instantly killed his flashlight and pressed himself into the shadow of a doorway. The figure staggered into the flicker of a burning trash bin. It was a man, or once had been. His head hung at an odd angle, one arm gnawed down to the bone. The infected man stumbled aimlessly, moaning soft, wordless gibberish. Mark held his breath. After a moment, the walking corpse wandered on, disappearing around a corner. Mark exhaled, shaking. The reality was even worse than he'd imagined. He had to hope not everyone had become like this. Maybe authorities had evacuated survivors. Maybe Anna and Jacob reached a safe zone. If so, where? His best chance for information was the fire station. It was only a few blocks from the hospital, and if any of his fellow firefighters were still alive, they might have left word or gathered at a shelter. And if not, he'd at least grab a better weapon and supplies. Keeping low, Mark cut through an alley, skirting around overflowing dumpsters. Rats scurried at his feet, scratching through garbage like it was any other night. The normalcy of that tiny sound amid catastrophe was jarring. He emerged onto 7th Street and there, looming in the darkness, was Fire Station 4. It was Mark's second home for the last 10 years, a 2-story brick firehouse with red bay doors. One of those doors was open halfway, knocked off its tracks and stuck at an angle. The building was dark and silent. A fire engine was missing from the bay, likely driven out during the chaos. Broken glass glittered on the sidewalk outside the station's office entrance. Mark's gut clenched as he approached. "Hello," he whispered. No answer but the drip, drip of rainwater from the roof. He slipped inside through the pedestrian door. Inside, the station was lit only by his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The familiar smell of smoke, oil and bleach filled his nose. "Danny, Chief?" he called softly, hoping to find a friendly face. Only silence replied. The garage was empty, save for the second engine and an ambulance, both parked askew with their doors hanging open. Lockers along the wall had been flung wide, gear missing. Mark moved the beam across the walls. The whiteboard near the kitchen was covered in black scrawls, reports of calls and frantic notes. Stepping closer, he read entries written in thick marker. May 2nd, 11:45 p.m. Fire at New Horizons Research Lab. 3 firefighters injured. Unknown chemical exposure. May 3rd, 12:30 a.m. Davis to St. Mary's Hospital. Bite wound. May 3rd, 2 a.m, outbreak, patients attacking staff, quarantine in place. May 3rd, 2:30 a.m, citywide emergency, all units mobilized. Further down, the handwriting grew messy, letters scrawled diagonally. Too many sick, shutting down, heading to evac at Civic Center. Mark stared at the board, heart pounding. The puzzle pieces clicked together in his head. The date of the lab fire was 2 nights before his last memory. A bite wound. He gingerly pushed up the sleeve of his jacket, and there it was on his forearm, a crescent of scars, faded but unmistakable. In that moment, a flash of memory ignited. He was carrying a coughing scientist out of a smoky room, feeling a sharp pain as she convulsed and bit into his arm. He remembered shouting, others pulling her off. Mark staggered back from the board, the flashlight shaking in his hand. Before he could process the revelation, a scraping scratch sounded from deeper in the station. Mark whipped around, shining the light toward the dormitory hallway. A door at the far end was closed, but something banged against it from the other side. "Hello? Who's there?" Mark called quietly, inching forward with his makeshift spear raised. A muffled voice leaked through the door, a human voice, weak and broken. "Mark." It was a ragged whisper, but he recognized it at once. Danny. Mark nearly sobbed with relief. He rushed to the door. It was jammed shut with a heavy filing cabinet wedged against it. He heaved the obstacle aside with effort. "Danny, I'm here, hold on!" He yanked the door open. The stench hit him first, a stomach-turning mix of blood and rot. Then something lunged at him out of the darkness. Mark only caught a glimpse of Danny's familiar face, pale and slicked with sweat, before his friend crashed into him. Both men fell hard to the floor. Mark's flashlight skittered away, casting wild beams on the ceiling. "Danny!" Mark gasped. His relief curdled into terror as he realized Danny's eyes were bloodshot and unfocused, his skin burning with fever. Danny snapped his jaws, teeth clacking inches from Mark's throat. "No, Danny, stop!" Mark pleaded, struggling beneath the weight of his friend's body. Danny's snarl growled, pinning Mark's shoulders. Mark strained to hold him back, arms shaking. They grappled, rolling amidst the debris. Danny's strength was frantic and unhinged. His fingers clawed at Mark's jacket, trying to tear through to flesh. They slammed into a turnout locker, knocking a fire axe loose onto the floor with a heavy clang. Mark seized it, hands slipping on the handle as Danny's other hand wrapped around his neck, choking. Gasping for air, Mark swung blindly. The weight on him suddenly slackened. Danny slumped to the side. Mark scrambled up, panting, and snatched up the flashlight. Danny lay still, the axe blade buried deep in his chest. His cloudy eyes stared at nothing. Mark's vision blurred with tears. He fell to his knees beside his fallen friend. I'm so sorry, he choked out, voice echoing in the silent station. A static crackle broke the silence. Mark jerked his head up. The station's radio, mounted on the wall, had come alive with a burst of static. Through the fuzz, a voice emerged. Any survivors? This is the US Army 12th evac unit. Quarantine zone has been overrun. We are extracting remaining civilians at the riverfront today at 0600 hours. If you can hear this, get to the evacuation point. Repeat, we will be there until 600, then we have to leave. Over. Mark staggered to his feet, wiping his face with a shaky hand. He fiddled with the volume knob, but the transmission had already faded back to static. 600 hours, dawn, at the riverfront. That was across town. But the army was still airlifting people out? Hope flared within him. If Anna and Jacob were still alive, maybe they'd try to reach that evacuation. Maybe he could meet them there. He clipped the portable radio to his belt and took a last, heartbroken look at Danny's body. The sight made his stomach twist with guilt and grief, but he couldn't stay. The axe was still embedded in Danny's chest. Mark left it, unwilling to wrench it out of his friend. Instead, he picked up the dropped Halligan bar, a heavy steel pry tool from the floor, and gripped it tightly. As he moved toward the exit, a chorus of distant moans rose from outside. The commotion had drawn attention. Through the broken bay door, Mark glimpsed figures gathering in the rainy street, attracted by the noise of the fight or the radio. Their eyes glinted in the dark as lightning flashed. More infected, at least half a dozen, were converging on the station. Mark slipped out a side door into the alley before they could spot him. He bit back a cry as he ran, adrenaline masking the aches in his body. He had to get home. It was only a few blocks further, and pray his family was still there. If they weren't, the riverfront evacuation was his last chance to find them. The streets grew more familiar. Mark turned onto his block, nerves taut. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, the rain easing to a drizzle. His house was halfway down the street. Miraculously, it still stood. One front window was shattered, but the structure looked intact. The door was closed. Mark's heart hammered as he approached. He had dreamed of this homecoming every agonizing minute since waking, but not like this, not stumbling through a dead city. He stepped onto the porch. "Anna? Jake?" he called quietly, afraid of what answer might come. He tried the door. Inside the foyer, the air reeked of spoiled food and something fouler. In the grey morning light spilling through the broken window, he saw dried brown stains smeared across the hardwood floor, signs of a violent struggle. Mark swallowed hard, edging into the living room. "Anna?" he whispered. The living room was empty, couch cushions tossed about. Jacob's small blue baseball cap lay on the carpet next to a dark, crusted stain. Mark's vision swam. He picked up the cap with trembling fingers, memories of his 6-year-old laughing and begging to play catch flooding his mind. A soft thump came from upstairs. Mark's head snapped up. Someone, or something, was moving. He set the cap down and tightened his grip on the Halligan tool like a bat. Slowly, he ascended the stairs, each step groaning under his weight. At the top, the hallway was dim. The door to the master bedroom was ajar, the bathroom door wide open. But it was Jacob's bedroom door at the end that held Mark's attention. It was shut tight, and from behind it came a faint scratching sound, irregular and persistent. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears. He inched forward. A heavy dresser had been dragged in front of Jacob's door, partially barricading it. With effort, Mark gripped the dresser and muscled it aside, his mind racing with possibilities. Were Anna and Jacob hiding in there? Alive? He took a steadying breath and gently turned the knob. The door creaked open. "Jacob," Mark whispered into the darkness of the little bedroom. The curtains were drawn. It was nearly pitch black, save for the weak light from the hall. The scratching noise had stopped. The room was silent. Mark swept his flashlight in a slow arc. The beam illuminated scattered toys, superhero posters on the wall, the small bed in the corner. On the rumpled Spider-Man sheets sat a tiny figure. "Jake!" Mark gasped in relief, stepping forward. It was his son, back turned to the door, sitting on the bed. "Oh, thank God! Jacob, it's Daddy!" The little boy did not stir or speak. He only emitted a low, eerie murmur. Mark's stomach twisted. Something was very wrong. He edged closer, the light in his hand trembling. "Jacob." Jacob turned his head at the sound of his name. The flashlight beam fell fully on him now, and Mark felt the blood drain from his face. His son's cherubic face was pallid, eyes filmed over with milky white. Dried blood was caked around the child's mouth and down the front of his dinosaur pajamas. Jacob's small lips pulled back in a mindless snarl at the brightness. Mark's knees nearly buckled. "No, oh God, no," he moaned. He rushed to the bed and fell to his knees, dropping the flashlight. It rolled away, casting crazy skewed shadows. Jacob hissed, shrinking back from the sudden rush, but did not lunge. He seemed confused, as if some part of him recognized the figure collapsing at his feet. Mark reached out with shaking hands. "Jake, buddy, it's me," he crooned, tears streaming down his face. Jacob cocked his head at the familiar voice. A strangled, guttural whine escaped the boy's throat, an echo of the child who used to run laughing into Mark's arms. Mark gently touched his son's cheek. The skin was cold, lifeless. Jacob sniffed at his father's hand like a curious animal, but still did not bite. Mark sobbed openly now, pulling the small body into his arms. Jacob hung limply, neither resisting nor embracing, just trembling in his father's grasp with a soft, mindless moan. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Mark looked up, still clutching his son. In the doorway stood Anna. His wife's once bright eyes were dull and sunken, her blonde hair matted with dried blood. One of her arms bore a vicious bite wound. The torn sleeve was soaked in blackened gore. She swayed on her feet, staring blankly at the tableau inside the room. "Anna," Mark breathed. Anna's head jerked toward him at the sound of her name. She staggered into the room, her movements twitchy and puppet-like. Mark braced himself, shielding Jacob, but Anna didn't pounce. Instead, she hovered uncertainly, lips quivering as a raspy rattle reverberated in her chest. Her cloudy eyes flicked from Mark to the child he held, as if some sliver of recognition sparked deep inside. Mark remained on the floor, his infected family surrounding him in an eerie tableau. They weren't attacking. A horrific realization dawned. To them, he didn't smell like prey. He was infected too. He was one of them. A broken, bitter laugh bubbled out of Mark, equal parts anguish and horror, immune but infected, alive but not human. "I'm so sorry," he wept, looking from Anna to little Jacob. He wanted to believe they could still understand him, that somewhere behind those cloudy eyes they heard his apology. "This is my fault. I'm so sorry." Anna's head tilted at his sobbing tone, a grotesque parody of empathy. Mark reached for her hand. For one blessed second, she didn't pull away. Father, mother, and child sat together amid the darkness and ruin. A family reunion turned nightmare. The sudden thunder of helicopter rotors cut through the silence. The bedroom windows rattled. Bright lights swept through the upstairs hallway from outside. The helicopter was here, the evacuation team. Anna reeled back and let out a startled hiss at the commotion. Jacob whimpered and burrowed his face against Mark's chest. Mark gently released him and stood, guiding the boy to sit on the bed. "Stay here," he whispered, unsure if either of them could understand. I'll be right back." Heart pounding, Mark crept to the shattered front window downstairs. Outside, a military helicopter was descending over the street, searchlight cutting through the dawn mist. Several infected from the neighborhood were already shuffling toward the noise and light, arms upraised. Over a loudspeaker, a voice called, "Attention! Any survivors, signal your location." For a moment, Mark simply stared. Actual soldiers, real human voices. Salvation, so long prayed for, was here. He could be saved. His mind raced. If he could get aboard, maybe they had a safe zone. Maybe doctors who could cure this, maybe even cure Anna and Jacob. He stepped through the open doorway onto the lawn. The searchlight immediately swung and pinned him in its blinding beam. Mark raised one arm to shield his eyes and waved frantically with the other. "Here," he shouted hoarsely. "I'm alive! Over here!" The helicopter hovered lower, churning the air into a gale that ripped at Mark's rain-soaked jacket. Two soldiers in olive hazmat suits leapt out and rushed toward him, rifles slung at their backs. One held up a gloved hand in greeting. "Sir, are you bitten or infected?" the soldier shouted over the clamour of rotors. Mark opened his mouth, but no words came. Bitten, infected? He thought of the scar on his arm, the one he now knew came from patient zero, from him. He felt the virus inside him like a stain on his soul. His throat constricted. "Aye," he stammered. Before he could confess, a chorus of feral shrieks erupted behind him. The infected neighbours, drawn by the prospect of fresh victims. The soldiers lifted their rifles over Mark's shoulder. "Get down!" one yelled, shoving Mark toward the helicopter. Mark stumbled forward. If he got on that chopper, he knew it would doom everyone aboard. He whirled back, pushing against the soldier's chest. "Wait, you can't take me! I'm not!" His protest was drowned out by rapid gunfire as the second soldier opened up on the approaching infected horde. Mark felt himself being manhandled toward the helicopter's open bay. Panic surged through him. "No, you don't understand," he cried, voice cracking. But the first soldier hefted him bodily and hauled him into the chopper. As Mark was forced into a seat, he caught a final glimpse of his house below. On the lawn, the infected were collapsing under the soldiers' bullets. And at the edge of the open front door, two figures stood watching, a little boy and a woman, backlit by the morning light. Anna and Jacob had followed him out and now stared skyward, their faces blank and pale as the rising sun haloed them. Mark's heart shattered. He lunged toward the open bay, desperate to reach them. But the soldier pinned him back. The helicopter lifted off, banking away over the ruined streets. Mark's eyes stayed locked on his home until it dwindled from view. He went limp, tears streaking down his face. They were leaving. He was leaving. and there was nothing he could do to change what would come next. In the dim cargo hold, one of the soldiers pressed a water canteen into Mark's shaking hands. "You're safe now," the man said kindly, not knowing the awful truth. Mark gave a hollow, trembling nod. Outside, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, illuminating the devastated city below. He was alive, immune, saved. But as he closed his eyes in despair, Mark understood that he was also a harbinger of death, a wolf in the fold. The nightmare was far from over. Mark had survived when so many had not, untouched by the plague's bite. But salvation was a cruel illusion. Within his veins, the infection lived on. As the helicopter carried him toward the horizon, he realized the nightmare was far from over. He survived the infection, but now he is the infection.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.